Hey, it's Brennan, and today I have a film that, in my opinion, is a pretty underrated sci-fi horror film, and is by a now famous director who at the time was very early on in his career. Today, I bring you a movie that links pretty heavily back to my previous video on Dead Space, and this movie is Event Horizon. This video will work pretty similar to my previous videos. I'll start off by giving a breakdown of the story overall, and then get into the actual analysis portion. I think it kind of goes without saying, but there's a pretty heavy spoiler warning for this video. I will be going into detail about all the story and getting into deep analysis of it, so if you want to avoid spoilers, you're warned. This is the first time I'm doing this, but there's a pretty heavy gore warning for this movie. It's practical effects, but, you might want to be warned of that. This is a seizure warning for the video. There is a lot of flashing lights or strobe lights within the content that I'm analysing. And one last thing before we start. My last movie video was pretty heavily copyright struck by Warner Brothers. I ended up having to re-upload it without any movie clips, so I'll see if I can work around this one if it gets struck by Paramount or any of the other companies that made this movie. And so without further ado, let's get started. We start the movie off with this cool space whirlpool title sequence, before we then move into the real first scene of the movie. We are given a brief timeline of events to explain how humanity has continued to expand from 2015 onwards. Within Event Horizon, humanity has managed to create more accessible space travel. However, there are still many things we don't know, and that brings us to 2047. This movie came out in 1997, and this movie is set in 2047. So even though that's only 23 years from now, at the time when this movie came out, that would have been 50 years in the future. The rate at which humanity has progressed has been steady, but there are still meant to be things that we don't know, at least within the universe of Event Horizon. And so that brings us to our first true scene. We have some freeform camera work as we explore the outside and inside of this ship. We see many floating objects, but there's no one there, apart from a single man floating in one of the rooms, heavily cut up and disfigured, and he screams as we zoom out and see that it was a dream sequence. Now we're introduced to Dr. Weir as he wakes up and picks up a picture of his wife, putting it with many other pictures of his wife. He is having a bit of trouble getting through his morning routine and seems to be struggling with some sort of anxiety. But he continues through, and we zoom out and see that he is in a space station in low Earth orbit. In the next scene, we are introduced to the Lewis and Clark and its crew. When we first meet the crew, they are close to Earth and are preparing for stasis. Stasis within Event Horizon is a process where humans go into these capsules in order to preserve them for long journeys, and this will be a 2-month-long journey from Earth to Neptune, where their top-secret mission objective is. So that you have a reference point for the rest of the video, I will introduce each of the characters and their role here briefly, but we do learn these things about them in a slightly different order. First, we have Dr. Weir, the head researcher of the crew. We have Captain Miller, the captain of the Lewis and Clark. We have Peters, the tech expert. We then have Stark, Justin, Cooper, and DJ, who are all crew members of the Lewis and Clark. And then Smith, who is the lead pilot. Dr. Weir is anxious about going into stasis, but he knows he has to because it is a long journey. However, he wakes up midway through stasis to find his wife sitting in the pilot's seat. She won't answer him until suddenly she appears behind him, speaking very cryptically, saying that she is waiting, and she is eyeless. This, however, was another nightmare for Dr. Weir, and he wakes from stasis to the crew trying to help him as he is sputtering and choking on this stasis fluid. Now that they have all exited stasis, they are close to Neptune, ready for their mission, and so Dr. Weir heads to the briefing room to explain to them all what the real mission is. And here is where we get the explanation of what the Event Horizon and its purpose is. Dr. Weir is not just a researcher on the crew, he's the inventor of the Event Horizon. He explains that the core of the ship, or the gateway, is essentially a giant device that creates a massive black hole for the Event Horizon to travel through. The mission of the Lewis and Clark is to go, retrieve the Event Horizon, and find out what happened to its crew, because there was only one sign of what happened to them, and they'll head back to the control room of the Lewis and Clark to listen to the final recording that the crew of the Event Horizon sent out. It sounds horrific, like there are many screams happening at once. But DJ hears something. Liberate me, Latin for save me or free me. With this, the crew head back up to the top part of the control room as they begin their final descent to the Event Horizon. However, malfunctions occur that cause their ship to be pulled rapidly towards it. They manage to slow down and dock successfully. Now, the first crew members need to go aboard the Event Horizon to explore and find out what has happened. Dr. Weir wants to be one of the first to go on to explore what has happened to his creation, but Captain Miller says it's not safe and wants more experienced members of the crew to go on first. The crew listen to Captain Miller, and Captain Miller is one of the first to go on, along with Peters and Justin. The Event Horizon seems completely abandoned. All that is there is random bits of floating debris, a floating hand, and a heavily disfigured body floating in the 0G atmosphere. Justin finds the core of the ship and notices there seems to be some sort of coolant leak happening. Mysteriously, as Justin waits in the core room, the core suddenly aligns itself, opening up the gateway and allowing him to go up and touch the black liquid that forms the gateway. And then he is pulled in. Cooper then suits up to go and save Justin, while Peters works on restoring the gravity to the Event Horizon. By the time Cooper arrives at the core room, Justin is ejected out of the gateway, and a massive shockwave goes through the Event Horizon and badly damages the Lewis and Clark. The final members of the crew leave the Lewis and Clark and go onto the Event Horizon with the others, as gravity is finally restored. The crew are in a perilous situation. They're running out of oxygen, and they need a way to escape from this barren ship. Ultimately, they decide on sending Smith and Cooper to deal with repairs on the ship, while the rest try and explore, figure out what's happened, and gather what they can for the journey back. However, the members of the crew begin experiencing hallucinations, as they try and figure out what has caused Justin to go into a catatonic state, and what caused the former crew to disappear. Peters notices her son on one of the hospital tables as she's watching Justin. Dr. Weir, while he is exploring the tech catacombs of the core room, sees his wife Claire once again. Captain Miller notices a former crew member of his who burned to death in the core room. The crew members disagree with Dr. Weir that these hallucinations must be caused by something else. All the crew agree that the Event Horizon, and in particular the core, seems to be doing something to them. Stark suggests that it could be the ship is alive, and seems to know each of their fears. As Peters is watching Justin, she then is chased by an invisible entity back into the bridge room with the rest of the crew, and Justin goes missing. It turns out Justin has locked himself in the airlock and is about to end it once and for all. The crew can't open the airlock from inside the ship because there is a mechanism to protect from that, so Justin will die in the vacuum of space if Captain Miller doesn't return from the Lewis and Clark to save him. Miller manages to save Justin, but only after he has sustained massive injuries. Miller and DJ agree that something is very wrong, and DJ realizes that he got the Latin from the recording wrong. It's not liberate me, it's liberate tutte me. Save yourself. And with this, Stark and Peters discover the original recording that was sent out by the Event Horizon. The former crew, with their captain Kilpatrick, who speaks Latin. Earlier, Peters discovered a recording of the crew before they had gone missing. Captain Kilpatrick was the one who spoke Latin, but in this new recording they have discovered, all the members of the crew seem to be experiencing madness. We see flashes of gore and the members hurting each other before Captain Kilpatrick shows himself holding his own eyes, and he says, Liberate tutte me ex infernis. Save yourself from hell. With this, Captain Miller decides that the crew must get out of there. They need to gather supplies, get on the Lewis and Clark, which has just been repaired, and get going as soon as possible. Smith and Peters are gathering air tanks from the core room, but Peters is distracted by her son, or what she thinks is her son. He leads her up into the higher regions of the core room, where she then falls down onto the steel deck of the core room, and she dies on impact. Dr. Weir comes in and sees Peter's body. He's distressed by this, but he's taken over by a vision. This vision is of his wife's suicide. In this vision, in the final moments, his wife then speaks to him and takes out his eyes, and he follows suit outside in the real world. Then, as Smith and Cooper are doing the final preparations on the Lewis and Clark for the crew to leave, Miller notices one of the bombs on the Event Horizon has gone missing. The way that the Event Horizon is designed is that the middle section of the ship can be destroyed, blown up, separating the core from a lifeboat section of the ship. However, one of these bombs has been placed on the Lewis and Clark by Dr. Weir, and this bomb is found far too late by Smith, and it explodes, killing him instantly and sending Cooper flying on a piece of debris. Cooper, however, manages to work out a way to blast himself back to the Event Horizon. Miller then warns DJ that Dr. Weir is on the prowl and is going to start killing more members of the crew. They need to be careful. But DJ is far too late and is killed by Dr. Weir, and then mutilated. Miller arrives far too late to save DJ, so he grabs a bolt repair gun and starts searching for Dr. Weir and the remaining crew members. Stark is unconscious but alive in the control room, and Dr. Weir is also there. He has sewn his eyes shut and has a bolt repair gun of his own. Stark and Miller try, unsuccessfully, to stop Dr. Weir, but then Cooper lands on the front glass of the control room. Dr. Weir then shoots a bolt and pierces the glass, which opens up the control room to the vacuum of space. Stark and Miller manage to escape, but Dr. Weir is sucked out. Stark and Miller head to the airlock, where Cooper has managed to make his way there. The three of them then decide to use the ship's mechanics to save themselves. They are going to go onto that lifeboat section and blow the rest of the ship. However, the ship's defences are fighting back stronger than ever. Cooper and Stark are attacked by a wave of blood in the lifeboat. While Miller is arming the explosives, he is attacked by the burning entity of his former crewmate. He manages to save himself by jumping into the control room. However, in there, Dr. Weir is waiting for him. Dr. Weir then shows Captain Miller what hell is. They fight, but Captain Miller is no match for the hellish strength that Dr. Weir has managed to imbue himself with. You see, the gateway that Dr. Weir created is actually a portal to hell. And so in his final moments, Captain Miller manages to find the strength to detonate the explosives. It separates the lifeboat, saving Stark and Cooper, but for Miller, it's too late, and the last bits of the Event Horizon travel through the portal to hell. Now Cooper and Stark have entered stasis with Justin. They are flying back to Earth, and they appear to have been picked up by a rescue crew. But it's actually Dr. Weir. But that was a dream sequence. Really, they have been found by a rescue crew, but mentally they are scarred by the experiences they have had on the event horizon. Now that I've given you the story, let's get into the analysis portion. So for the analysis portion, let's go in chronological order. Let's start from the very beginning, dream sequence. This opening dream sequence gives us a good little insight into what's coming later on, but it also, in my opinion, seems to show how Dr. Weir and the event horizon have been psychically linked all along. From what I can tell, that floating figure in the room is Dr. Weir. So, from my understanding, this would mean that it's sort of both foreshadowing and a sort of premonition of what's to come, as well as showing us that he is psychically linked to the ship. There's some very good tension-building moments in this movie, and this scene where Dr. Weir has woken to his wife in this dream stasis section is pretty good at building that tension. In the first 15-20 minutes of the movie, we're kind of establishing how things are going to go pretty well for the rest of the movie. Very early on, we see signs of disobedience from Dr. Weir. We see Dr. Weir being a little bit dishonest with the crew when he's explaining what the mission is about. And of course, we also establish some very key paranormal sci-fi tropes. However, something else they establish very early on is religion in the movie. We see Smith holding his cross necklace, and DJ speaks a bit of Latin. From this, we can kind of make some inferences to Catholicism and Christianity as a whole. Now that we've gotten past the intro section, I feel that now I can start to talk about the movie in more general terms, since a lot of the themes are present throughout the whole movie. Let's talk about the visuals first. So the design of the ship, and the core, and all the setting in this movie seem to be pretty heavily inspired by Star Wars and Alien. It seems pretty clear to me that Paul W.S. Anderson was taking a lot of inspiration from those movies. One of the inspirations for Alien, however, was H.R. Giger, and from my understanding, H.R. Giger actually worked on the Alien movies as well. If you don't know who H.R. Giger is, he is an artist that creates these biomechanical alien sculptures and paintings. The space aspect to this movie is pretty well done for the most part. I'll get into later some of my criticisms about the movie, but for now we're just going with basic analysis and what I'd like. I find it pretty interesting that they appear to use tablets in this movie. That's pretty forward-thinking for the time, considering they didn't even have smartphones. Now, the part of the visuals to me that's the most interesting is really the hell visuals and the satanic imagery throughout the movie. Throughout the movie, we see little signs, even the tunnel leading up to the core. Justin describes it as looking like a meat grinder. When it comes to the hell visuals, there's a heavy emphasis on depravity. In my opinion, most of the hell visuals appear to be inspired by Hellraiser. One of the key themes of the original Hellraiser movie is this idea of pleasure through pain and evil, and that appears to be what they're going for quite a lot in this movie. I'm obviously going to have to censor quite a bit of the hell scenes, but there's a heavy emphasis on depravity, both of a sexual nature and of a violent nature. In all the hell cutaways, we see a lot of gore, and one of the key focuses is on the things you see, and this essence of trauma causing these immense emotional reactions from each of the characters. For example, Justin has seen so much that it makes him look introspectively, and when he looks introspectively, he wants to end himself because of the things that he's seen. His entire perspective changes after going through that gateway. Since we're talking about the religious and hell themes of the movie, let's talk about the main message of the movie, and what in my opinion is the most important thing, and that is the hubris of man. That appears to be what Paul W.S. Anderson is going for here. He's trying to explore how hubris can lead us to these places. Our search for knowledge is so great that eventually it leads us to the very edge of the universe, where there are things beyond our comprehension that will lead to our downfall. For me, in terms of the Bible, it's a hearkening back to the Garden of Eden, right from the start of humanity. The snake encourages Eve to eat the apple from the tree of knowledge. And what happens? It left humanity fighting for survival for the entirety of its existence. Similarly, in this movie, Dr. Weir was tempted so much by the knowledge of what's beyond the boundaries of our universe that he decided to create a portal, and this portal is so powerful it does take us far beyond the boundaries of our universe, into that which we can't even comprehend, that which is so despicable and evil that we humans can't even hope to comprehend or take in that knowledge. The final main point I have to make is about the type of horror that we see within this movie, and that is existentialism and cosmic horror. Now, existentialism and cosmic horror are very, very interesting areas of horror in general. So what is cosmic horror? Cosmic horror is existentialism. It is Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. It is Uzumaki by Junji Ito. It is Hell in Event Horizon. Hell is a place so incomprehensible within Event Horizon that it causes the inanimate to become alive. It causes good to become evil. Within Christianity, hell is the opposite of good. It is the evil to the virtuous. So it is the exact opposite of all that is natural, because God creates all that is natural, and so when there is something unnatural, that is the exact opposite of good. So where do we see this in Event Horizon? Well, we get even early on an explanation from the crew. The only way to travel these massive distances would be either to travel at the speed of light, or to completely disregard physics itself. Dr. Weir explains that his method is within the realms of science, but it's just very experimental, something we don't understand yet. But it's all in the pursuit of knowledge, right? Once again, this ties all in with the hubris of man. He is in the search of something so grand beyond his comprehension that his own hubris leads him to these unnatural methods. And ultimately, these unnatural methods lead him to hell. Now, I have a theory about this movie as to why Dr. Weir didn't know that this gateway would lead to hell. I do wonder if this movie is similar to Dead Space, in the way that Dr. Weir was using some form of technology that he didn't really understand. There are many, many similarities between this movie and Dead Space. Admittedly, Dead Space was inspired by this movie, and you can really tell. Everything from the way that the crew arrive with their ship malfunctioning, to the floating hand in the medical room, to the incomprehensible, somewhat alien artifact that then ultimately leads to the demise of all the crew. And this is where my theory comes in. I do wonder if Dr. Weir was working with potential alien or even hell technology. It sounds strange at first, but then you start to consider he doesn't really understand what the gateway actually does. You see, according to him, the event horizon creates a black hole that the event horizon travels through. But if so, what is this strange liquid? He claims that the gateway can't align itself on its own, but once again, it does it anyway. Also, the gateway appears to cause hallucinations, but he never experienced these hallucinations on Earth for him to then know that the hallucinations would be caused by it in the movie, which once again leads me to this theory that what if he created it using artificial means, things that he didn't really understand, and then when it went off, he didn't know that it would have the effects that it would. Because otherwise he would have known some of these effects, especially the hallucinations, before it went on its voyage over to Neptune. Now, like I said, this is just a theory, and there are some criticisms I have of the movie that means maybe I'm giving it a little bit too much credit. Now, my perspective on this movie is from a modern standpoint, so my criticisms are coming from watching it now, all these years after it came out. So bear in mind for some of these criticisms. Because my first criticism is the CG. In my opinion, the practical effects outweigh the CG so much that the CG really stands out as being quite bad. I find it really interesting because the practical effects in this movie are amazing. They're very gory, very disgusting, and yet you compare them to the CG, and the CG stands out as being really awkward and actually very immersion-breaking. That's why I'm actually very glad when we get past the sort of introduction phase to the movie and we start getting into the real events, because then they start using less CG and start really making it about these practical, disgusting gore horror effects. The second main criticism I have of this movie is the slow burn nature of it. I feel that this movie just takes a very long time to really start getting into the meat of things, although on a second watch through it does make those little subtle hints far more interesting. For example, that opening bathroom scene with Dr. Weir is much more interesting on a second watch through because you know now why he's so nervous and apprehensive about everything. It also makes the little religious references that the crew make much more impactful. However, like I said, this is on a second watch through. When you're watching it through for the first time, it's very slow burn, and it takes quite a bit to get into the meat of anything. I do feel there were some wasted opportunities where they could have gone even more in depth on characters and concepts that would have made this movie even better. However, they just couldn't do it, instead gave us this slightly shallower interpretation of everything. And that brings me to my final criticism, which is this movie kind of doesn't know what it wants to be. It leans into action sometimes, with Lawrence Fishburne giving us this one-liner and this very insane end-of-movie fight scene. But then the other half of the time, it's a very slow and very deliberate horror with loads of tension building. Now, I'm fine with some dynamics in a movie, giving us some slow, tense parts, building up the tension, ratcheting things up until a scare, and then contrasting them with very heart-pounding, fast-paced sections. But some of the dialogue and some of the things that are done in the movie kind of lean it way more in the direction of like an action flick. It gives it some cheese and some charm, but it also stops it from reaching that really high-class point when it comes to horror. For example, we get the Lewis and Clark explode, and Cooper gets flung out into space, but then he starts making his way back. And it's very comedic, it's funny, because Richard T. Jones is good at making it funny. But then we follow that very shortly after with this very brutal disfiguring of DJ, and it feels a little odd, a little flip-floppy in terms of not knowing what it wants to do. Overall, I like the movie, and I like the way it explores some themes of existentialism and religion within horror, especially within sci-fi horror. It's pretty unique in the way it does that. But I also feel like it misses the mark in some key ways that other horror movies don't. Other horror movies, I feel, have a better balance of cheesiness and comedy along with the actual horror, tension, and explosion moments. I would say, if you want to watch it, go ahead. It is definitely worth a watch, and there is a cult following for it for a reason. I enjoy it as well. But, of course, do bear in mind, it's not for everyone, and there is some pretty heavy gore in the movie. Well, that's all I've got for you for now. Thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this from me, subscribe, hit the bell notification, because I will be releasing more videos like this on other video games and movies. Give the video a like if you liked it. But that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.